With the Fate collab and Phainon right around the corner, it may be harder for you to allocate your pools properly, and so here are my investment recommendations to get the best value for your star rail count. In the first half, we have the Herta and Hyacine. Because a lot of content in the game is still AoE favored, the Herta is still quite the powerhouse, and I don't know when this honeymoon period for the Herta will end, but I'm very confident even if it does end, she will still cook pure fiction. However, it is quite likely some content here and there will still favor AoE, and the Herta will most definitely fry those stages when it comes, especially with the recent release of an XR who elevates the Herta's flexibility. Hence, as of 3.3, the Herta is still looking to be very strong and very meta relevant, and is still a great pickup for AoE stages. I myself, in a lot of endgame content, I'm still using the Herta for higher scores in Apocalyptic Shadow or 0 cycles in Realm of Chaos. If you already have the Herta and want more add-ons, perhaps E1 or E2, E1 reduces the Herta's dependency on AoE content by adjusting her interpretation stacks, which is the Herta's biggest disadvantage, allowing her to be played more comfortably in lower target scenarios, while E2 is the crazy damage dealing add-on, increasing her damage by an absurd amount, almost doubling her damage as compared to E0. Of course, her signature icon can be quite useful as well, and will give you more leeway in the battle by giving you more skill points, and you can then perhaps give more resources to the other erudition units like an XR and allow them to deal more damage. It does make building the Herta slightly easier as well due to the extra crit rate, but the damage boost is quite easily compensated for from the Battle Pass Lightcone, Peaceful Day, and hence is the lower priority among her vertical investment. Hence, I recommend pulling NXR first, then E1 and E2, followed by S1. As I've already gone through in the previous two videos dedicated to her, Hyacine is a very strong sustain for HP scaling units, while also being the highest damage dealing sustain in the game. She is a fantastic investment for Casteris teams, especially if you also have 3B. She should be very strong for Blade with her S1 as well, but Blade will only be receiving buffs in patch 3.4. As of right now, if you are an endgame player, I can only recommend Hyacine for Casteris or Blade in good faith, but if you are a newer player who is still lacking better 5-star sustains, Hyacine is still quite versatile and can be used in many other teams, Acheron, Facial, Herta, technically even Aglaea and so on, but of course you maximize the value if you are using Casteris or Blade teams. Once again, E1 is better for Casteris, while S1 is better if you want to play Hyacine in many different teams. I don't think vertical investment past E1 S1 is very worth it, to be honest. In fact, I recommend stopping at either E0 S1 or E1 S0 depending on which you need more of. And if you don't have Casteris, I highly recommend getting her on her next rerun. Anyways, a mix of hunt and destruction and the fastest unit in the game, Aglaea is still an extremely strong unit that unfortunately hasn't had as much endgame content catered to her like the Herta has, but I believe Aglaea to be even more versatile due to her incredibly high and frequent 3-target damage, allowing her to be very viable even in game modes like Pure Fiction, and perhaps the lack of catering to her is proof of that. She performs at an extremely high level and is my easiest team to brute force 0 cycles for the past few patches if I don't want to use my brain. Both Aglaea's E1 and S1 are incredibly strong, but I prefer S1 because it gives additional base speed, allowing for easier building and speed tuning. This makes it much easier to get 3 turns before one Sunday turn at 134 speed. E1 on the other hand basically erases Aglaea's energy issues and goes one step further. In the short run, Aglaea is able to then use her ultimate multiple times, giving her even more turns due to the 100% action advance. Obviously, the vulnerability is incredibly useful as well, and in total contributes a huge boost in damage at E1. I guess you can try E1 as 0, but that most likely means you lose one additional turn every single rotation, which will obviously add up over a fight. Anyways, for Aglaea, I recommend getting Sunday first, followed by S1 and Robin, and then E1 for her vertical investment. Before we move on with the rest of the video, I'd like for you to know this video is sponsored by LD Shop. It's a safe and reliable way to top up jades at a discounted price from 13 to 25% off, and you can get extra discount coupons with my code in the description. All you need is your UID, you don't need to give your login details or anything like that, and you get your jades very quickly. I got my Express Pass pretty much instantaneously, and if you spend 80 USD, you can become a VIP with even more rewards like free Express Passes and more discounts. Once again, the link is in the description and in the comments. Finally, we have Cipher. I have yet to talk about her, so let's break down her kit a bit first. She is an amplifier with a pretty huge vulnerability debuff and is also able to record efficient damage dealt, which she can then reallocate when using her ultimate. Honestly, you can sort of think of her ultimate as a 20% true damage buff if AoE, or 12% if single target. The issue is, like I said, it only records efficient damage and not overflow damage. So if theoretically Acheron deals 5 million damage but the enemies only have 100 HP left, Cipher only records that 100 extra damage and absolutely none of the remaining 4 million plus damage, meaning it will technically perform worse than an actual 20% or 12% true damage buff in reality. However, being able to choose when you want this damage to be used is the huge upside you are trading the lower damage for. If you don't require the extra true damage in the first cycle, you could potentially hold all the true damage for the second cycle, which would be even greater by then. This can be very useful if, for example, the second phase of the stage is much harder than the first, perhaps like Flame Reaver, and this is only one example of how you can be using this. Also, since this is true damage, it completely ignores everything. Yes, even damage reduction on bosses and so on. So before you break weakness in Apocalyptic Shadow, for example, Cypher's true damage will deal the same damage as per usual, or the pesky Flame Reaver. You can even use her ultimate while he has 8 stacks of damage reduction. However, this also means it ignores buffs from your own team or debuffs placed on the enemy. Even if Cipher got plus 10,000% attack buff or something stupid like that, the true damage portion of the ultimate will not be affected. But then again, this damage recorded is already buffed in the first place, so which is why as he stands right now, she doesn't seem to be a huge upgrade in Acheron or facial teams, who should technically be some of her best scenarios, because Cipher isn't exactly offering just higher damage, but more control and flexibility over how you play, and can be very useful if you know what you're doing. In addition to that, Cipher is an extremely flexible support unit, kind of like Trebi or Robin, and can be used in genuinely any and every team in the game. Hence, I think Cipher is a great pull if you want to save more pulls on supports, because if you are missing a slot, you can just slot Cipher in without thinking too much about it. However, if you are an endgame player that is more concerned with vertical investment, I would only really recommend Cipher for facial and Acheron teams so far. Whether or not she gets better synergies in the future, I obviously have zero clue, but it is important to note that may be the case. Now for the future characters Phainon and Saber, they both seem to be DPS units as they are both destruction, so perhaps if you want a newer, shinier DPS unit instead of Aglaea or the Herta, perhaps you could save for them instead. The thing to consider is that Aglaea and the Herta are guaranteed strong meta DPS units, and on the other hand, we have zero clue how Phainon or Saber will perform or do. As always, it's quite a risk to go all in into just one unit before you even know what they do, so I suggest at least thinking about a plan B. Thankfully, it seems Saber will be available for a longer period of time, so there's no rush to get her immediately in 3.4. Hence, I recommend Hyacine if you have Casteries or Blade, the Herta or Aglaea if you are in need of a new DPS, Cipher if you rather invest in support units, or finally, to save for Phainon and Saber if you need a new DPS but you are not interested in the Herta or Aglaea. For 3.3, I don't really think there is a single unit that is much more valuable than the others, but rather a bunch of really good units depending on what you need more of for your account. That's pretty much it for this 3.3 investment guide. Thanks for watching, and see you.